Hey guys, welcome to Creative Ace. Today, we're going to be talking about how to make a digital collage in Photoshop. Digital collage is actually called compositing, which is what it would be referred to in digital arts industry, but for the sake of what we're doing, calling it collage seemed more understandable, and there's a bunch of great content if you search digital collage on Google or the digital collage hashtag on Instagram. When I made the original tutorials for making a PNG in Photoshop and how to make a digital collage with PNGs in Illustrator, that was the workflow that I was comfortable with at the time. While that is a way to make digital collages, there's a much easier workflow in Adobe Photoshop that I shifted to over the past years using layers and some cutting techniques that we'll look at right now. We're going to begin by finding some images to combine on one of my favorite websites, Pexels. Before we start, I want to talk a little bit about what Pexels is. So on this website, you're free to use any image for free, no attribution required for personal and commercial purposes. What's amazing about this site is that it has high-resolution images submitted by professional photographers, and the content is curated for us all in one place. You can use them on your blog or website, but it's really important to note that you can't sell them unaltered. This means that you have to add value to and transform any and all content that you use, which is not yours, for it to be considered legitimate. In our case, this will be fine because we'll be transforming the content by combining images together in our digital collage. So to begin, I'm going to start by bringing up my Lighthouse digital collage from 2020, and it's a good place to start because it's going to speak to why file organization is so important. Because I saved the original files, the original images for these three Lighthouse files somewhere else, I'm actually unsure of where those images are, and same thing for the waves. So we're going to restart by going to Pexels, so that way we can find that ocean image again. I'm going to put ocean. There we go, there. So this I'm going to save. I'm going to save the original file size, and it's just going to go to my downloads. And then I'm going to put in my lighthouses. So I'm going to open my downloads file folder, and I'm going to copy, click and drag them all over. So coming back to the idea of file organization for a second, once I've created my digital collage file that's going to be working with all of these images, everything can stay contained in this one folder so that it all connects really nicely. So if you save all of these pictures in different folders and then move them around, your computer will not be able to find your files when you go to open your Photoshop document. And so that means that if you want them to work, or you want to work on it later on, you'd have to locate and relink these files when you go to open it the next time, which means that you'd have to remember where they are. My PSD file or my Photoshop document file will connect to all of these images here when I open it, always. And so that's how you avoid it. That's how you avoid running into problems down the road for any type of digital art archive that you might have in the future. That's a way of kind of avoiding issues and streamlining your workflow so that you can always come back if you need to and there's no pressure. So now I'm going to continue by going to Photoshop. So just right-click it and open with Photoshop. And from there, I'm going to start by clicking and dragging this in over top. You can use my quick selection tool to kind of click and grab on these waves. It's going to be a pretty similar workflow to what I had before. But the only difference is that we don't need to save them. We don't need to save them as separate files to be PNGs because they can just kind of exist as PNGs in Photoshop. So I'm just going to double check on my kind of file here to see where I cut. And that's pretty similar to what I have here. So I'm going to go right click, layer by copy, and then I'm going to hide that. And I'm actually going to just crop this in a little bit. Here we go. Oh wait, sorry. So if I was using PNGs, I could have just kind of done that cut and paste there, but so now I'm going to click and drag my Lighthouse file into here. And I'm going to do the same thing where I can just kind of work on this layer directly and use my, my quick selection tool. And if I want, I can zoom right in here so we can kind of see what we're doing up close. Can add a little bit, take away a little bit. I'm going to use the Alt key to subtract from my selection. on the quick selection tool. And I can always clean up the edges with an eraser later, so even with the quick selection tool, it doesn't have to be quite perfect. Notice that it's kind of dipping in there. Okay, so I'm going to go right-click, right-click, layer via copy, and then hide my background layer. There we go. And then I'm going to use my eraser tool, and I'm going to change the size up a little bit, make it a little bit lower. Another alternative tool for layering elements is the eraser tool. This tool is probably the most useful tool of everything in Photoshop for me. I use it all the time to be able to make digital collages now. And you can change the eraser tool exactly the same as a brush tool, with your size and hardness options being found in the toolbar across the top. 0% hardness means that it will be very soft and feather your edges, while 100% hardness is very sharp and will make a very clean cut. I find feathering the edges helps make the image blend more naturally. Make it a little bit bigger here, to kind of smooth that edge over so that it's not quite so sharp. And I find that the feathering really does help, so I'm going to drop it down a little bit here. There we go. Definitely looks pretty good considering. Now I'm going to do the same type of texturing as we did before, but I'm going to drop this in. And I don't know if the quick selection tool will work really well for this one, but we're going to try anyways just to see. Oh yeah, we can grab it. This is a pretty low contrast image considering. I'm actually not going to grab that top bit there. Like I did before. I think the very first time I did it, I cut out everything pretty perfectly. But just to avoid those railings, I'm just gonna grab that. So that looks pretty good to me. In terms of darkness. Oh. And let's say you go layer via copy because you're like, oh, that looks good, and then you hide the layer below and you're like, oh, I totally missed some of that stuff. You can go Control Z a couple times, which is the undo button, and kind of go back to the selection option, and then you can clean up your selection from there. So I'm just going to kind of click a couple times, and you don't have to click and drag, you can just click to kind of get close to an edge, and it'll. What was really cool about this is that the program is like smart enough to kind of recognize whereabouts the edges are, so it kind of auto corrects itself to go to the edge that it thinks that you're going to. When it's low contrast, it's kind of harder for it to tell. So I did right click layer by copy again, and that's definitely much closer. So I'm just going to kind of overlay this, and so in Photoshop, it automatically holds your proportions when you click and drag for transforming. So if you're ever unsure about something, you can go, make sure that your layer is selected. Control T is always transform, so that you can kind of move it around and rotate it and flip it and mirror it and do whatever. But in Photoshop, you're gonna have to hold the Shift key. This is opposite to Illustrator. You're gonna have to hold the Shift key to warp the proportions so that I can stretch it out and make it kind of line up with the lighthouse that I have here. So I'm just gonna kind of make it a little bit bigger. And now I'm gonna use my blending mode and kind of just click through my blending modes here until, I think multiply is good, but I'm gonna check out a couple of other ones, see if there's anyone that I like. Linear burn's pretty good too. Overlay. I feel like it's not textured enough almost. Kind of like the darker. So the way blending modes work is really cool. You can use the darken ones, which essentially makes it darker. There's a lighten section. There's an I don't know, I want to call it multiply section because it doesn't quite do lighten or darken, but it makes the layers interact in an interesting way. And then we have like division here. So I'm going to say multiplication layers are here, division layers are here. So if you look at like the difference layer or exclusion layer, it's kind of looking like negative or inverse division. And then the last section is colors, so it will drop down. This isn't a great example because it does stuff with the color on top related to the color below. This one actually makes it black and white, again interacting with the colors. Yeah, so I think I'm going to choose multiply for it because that's kind of what I'm feeling here. So I'll go back, multiply, and I'm happy with that. Great. And then the last thing is going to be that colored lighthouse here. So I'm going to drop that back in. do use my quick selection tool here, which has been a great tool. And what's really cool is because I'm selected on the layer, it's only going to select things that are on that layer, so I won't be accidentally selecting the water behind it or something like that. I'm just going to go in to get some little details here. I'm going to add some edges. And especially with the low contrast images, it's kind of hard for it to pick up on the edges the same way that it would in other higher contrast images. I don't think I want that piece of cord or whatever that is. Okay, I think I'm happy with that, so I'm going to go back. I'm going to go, oh, I see that I'm missing a little bit of the window down there. Right click, layer by copy, hide. It's pretty good for what it is. And then I'm going to do something like that I did in my original video, which is replace color. So I think it's going to be, so it's going to be image adjustments and then replace color. And this is a really nifty feature. So I get to choose, I'm going to use my eyedropper tool and select the red because this is the color that I want to change, and I'm going to change this to blue. And you can see it actually happening as I go. I can make it lighter blue or darker blue. I kind of used a pretty dark blue last time. I think I kind of like this. Yeah, I'm into that. It's all nice. And then what's really cool is that you can increase the fuzziness or the threshold for it. So, you know, low fuzziness or low threshold is going to be only a little bit, and then the more that you drag that up, the more of that color it's going to kind of encompass. So that pretty much looks great as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. And then the last thing that I had was a piece of TypeScript poetry that I had done. I had like a negative version with white text and a black version with that I had made into PNGs. So I'm just going to drop that in. And I'm just going to use a blending mode because you can see that there's some white sections that I did not accurately erase because the way that I was doing it before was with PNGs, and so I thought it was really important for me to kind of like paint bucket erase. So I'm just going to use the multiply, and it's going to kind of get rid of all of that. So I actually didn't even need to do that for the white like originally. But here, you know what, actually no, I'm going to work from this. So I'm going to go Control C for copy. And I'll make sure that my ship layer is selected, my ship poem layer is selected. So I'm going to go Control C for copy, and then I'm going to click away and Control V for paste. And Control I for inverse, but it's not nearly as light as I want it to be. So I'm actually going to use, maybe I could use exclusion. So I'm going to delete that. And I'm going to get my ship layer, Control C, click away, Control V. Then I'm going to Control T to transform, and then it'll give me the option to like rotate or skew or whatever. And so I'm going to flip horizontally, and then maybe go to difference and see if it gives me. Oh, it doesn't give me the white exclusion. Subtract. There we go. Divide. So divide gives me a really nice clean version of that. So I'm just going to leave that there. Great. I think I'm really happy with that as a whole. So interesting. It's looking like at the bottom of the page that there is from where I scanned. So I'm just going to clean that up with my eraser tool. So I'm going to select on that ship layer, my ship 01 copy layer. I'm going to call that ship inverse. And then I'm going to use my eraser tool here and make sure that that's nice and selected. And it says this smart object must be rasterized before proceeding. Edit contents will no longer be available. Rasterize a smart object. That essentially just means make it into pixels. So I said yes to that. Oh, and then I'm gonna Control and do, and now I can erase that white line that's on there. I did not notice that in my original pieces. but it definitely was there. And so same thing here. I'm just going to go ship 01, and then I'm going to click on it, and it's going to say it has to rasterize. So I'm going to say yes, okay. And then I'm going to kind of erase that little strip of black that's like cutting through the image here. Yeah, so I think that on the whole, it's a lot easier to work in Photoshop than it is making PNGs. You can still make PNGs, and they're really useful. I use PNGs for logos that need clear backgrounds, so that way they can kind of just go wherever they want. But overall, it was a lot easier, a lot faster of a workflow than having to save each of them as an individual. And now I can save my whole Photoshop file. So I'm going to save this as Lighthouse Collage, and I'm going to put today's date. So 0203. And so with the Photoshop document, the .psd extension is really great because now I have this file saved where I can, I can add or subtract, or, I can have my working file stay where it is. And so I'm going to save this, and then I'm going to do another export. So file save as, and I'm going to save it as a JPEG, and I'm going to call this, I'm just going to leave it as that file name because I'm happy with that, and that it has the date in it. So adding the date to the end of the file name is something that I started doing this year, or like last year, so I can more easily find things even if I just search 2020. Here we go. Where does that even save into? File, save as. And there we go. Lighthouse Collage.